And hello YouTube, this is GSmaniamsmart, and in today's video we're going to talk a little bit of speculation about the next expansion that could be coming up near the end of this year. We'll talk a little bit about what Heart of Thorns didn't do right and what the new expansion needs to improve on, what I want to see the new expansion have, and we'll talk a little bit about the most recent patch. There wasn't much in it, a lot of minor patch notes, so we'll take a small amount of time in this video to discuss a few of those things, including a character select screen change, which could mean something. What's up guys, GSmaniamsmart here, today with another brand new video for Gaming with GS. Welcome back to another video, glad to have you here. If you happen to be new to the channel, if you happen to be new to my videos, I want to welcome you as well, and I encourage you to subscribe to the channel because we have plenty of other Guild Wars 2 content videos on the channels, plenty more to come as well. We do patch summaries, lore summaries, we talk about speculation about future patches, we have gold guides, we have different gameplay guides, dungeon guides, all kinds of cool stuff. So if you're interested in Guild Wars 2 or gaming, I highly encourage you to press that subscribe button as well as hit that post notification bell so you can stay up to date with all the most recent videos. Now, we did get a patch on April 18th and I didn't make a video on it mainly because there wasn't much in this patch. In fact, if you don't play Guild Wars very often and you only play for the patches, you might have not even realized that there was a patch because it wasn't very big. However, there are a few things that I do want to talk about in this patch that I thought were pretty cool, and one of them being the option to now disable player item chatter. Now, why is this so cool? Mainly because they're continuously looking at the options menu and adding new things to it. It's giving the player more control over their gameplay experience. And a while ago, they had implemented an option that allowed you to disable player chatter, which a lot of people really like because of the continuous repetitive things their character would say. So now you have the option to disable that chatter. Well, now you can also disable chatter from any items, like any talking backpacks of that sort. You can now disable that as well. So it's cool to see they're constantly adding new options to the game to allow us to have more control over it. Another cool thing they added in the April 18th patch is that unique text has been created for skill and trait tooltips specific to their game mode. So now if you happen to be in World vs. World, or if you happen to be in PvP, or if you happen to be in PvE, if the skill or trait you are looking at has been split among different game mode, you will get the proper description of that trait or skill according to what game mode you are in, which is really cool because it seems like they're finally moving forward with this idea of skill splitting that's needed to have been done for such a long time now, and we're finally getting some more clarity on this, which skills are split, which traits are split, and we're able to see that change in the tooltip, which initially was not there. A few raid fixes have also been made, but I'm not going to go over that because it's just bug fixes and it's nothing really interesting to talk about. For PvP also, they've updated the builds. Now, if you don't know what this is, a while ago they had included several builds for each class, a default build you can pick from. I think they had like 2 of them you could pick from. And these builds tend to be fairly good. They tend to stack up pretty well with some of the meta builds, which is good to see because that means they're not just throwing that idea out of the window. They're not paying attention to it anymore. They are continuously looking at the default builds they put into the game and optimizing them to be the best that they can be to match up with some of the other meta builds. For those who are new PvP players, they can just pick a build from that selection and they can do fairly well with it. So I'm glad that they're continuously looking at that. And I guess the only other noticeable change, which will basically lead us into discussion for the rest of this video, is that the character select screen reverted back to the original Guild Wars 2 character select screen. Now, you'll notice that when Heart of Thorns launched, we had a different character select screen, and it was more Heart of Thorns themed. However, when the April 18th patch came out, it had reverted back to the original character select screen, which made it seem like as if Heart of Thorns was never released. Now, why could this be happening? Why on earth would they possibly be messing around with that option? Well, the only guess is that they could possibly be testing out to see if they can put up the theme for the new expansion. If the new expansion's theme works, if they can continuously revert it, if that option still works for them to change. Now, maybe they forgot to change it back to the Heart of Thorns character select screen. Heck, it would have been crazy amazing if they would have accidentally left up the new expansion's character select screen. That would have gotten people wild. That would have been crazy. But it's just curious how all of a sudden now they're messing around with that option and they forget to change it back to Heart of Thorns. it clearly means something. They're clearly experimenting with it, and my best guess, it has to deal with the new expansion. Now, speaking of the new expansion, there is a theory right now, and several people support this theory, including myself. I think this could be possible. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm not saying that I fully support it, but I can see it happen. Kind of on the edge of, I'm kind of on the fence of whether I want to agree with this theory or not, because it does seem like it's a bit too short of a time frame. I mean, if you look at Heart of Thorns, ArenaNet announced like a year prior, and then for the next year, we got like, small releases and previews, and, the continuous hype train kept on going because they continuously released more blog posts, more information, more live streams, more videos, and that took a pretty long time. So that was a pretty big time frame from the initial announcement to the release. So I don't feel like this theory that I'm going to tell you right now is 100% accurate, because I feel like ArenaNet likes to have a larger time frame. But then again, that was back when we had Colin Johansson as the lead for Guild Wars 2, and things obviously run a lot different now. What we do know, though, is that Heart of Thorns was worked on for 2 years, right around that time frame. And well, this new expansion that we have right now has pretty much also been worked on for almost 2 years also. So, that could mean the new expansion that we're getting could possibly be releasing this fall. Now, why do I say this fall? Mainly because some people are saying that we will only be getting 6 episodes in Living World Season 3, which means we are in Episode 5 right now. Episode 5 is the next release, which is supposed to be coming right around May. My theory, and I've been telling you guys on the channel for the past few videos already, that we'll probably get the release of that episode May 2nd, May 3rd, right around that area. That Tuesday, that first week of May, that's when we'll get it. And my guess is that we're going to get the trailer to that episode tomorrow. So hopefully we get the trailer tomorrow, because it's going to be pretty exciting. It's really cool. And you can bet we're going to have a video on the trailer as well. So with that in mind, they'll probably release in May. And then we'll have May and June and maybe half of July to play it. And they'll probably release episode 6 in middle July or early July. And another 3 months forward, that'll be August, September, October. And guess what? That'll be perfect timing for the next expansion to come out. It almost fits perfectly in the timeline. And they would also have had similar amount of time to create this expansion like they had with the Heart of Thorns expansion. So in episode 6, we might be killing Primoris, we might be killing Jermag, and then it will lead into a pretty cool entryway for the next expansion. Not to mention, there are only 3 Living World season teams also developing these episodes, so if you do 6 divided by 3, each team gets 2 episodes. Maybe the last episode, everyone could work together to make something pretty cool and have a big finale. So in a way, it could make sense. It can make sense they would have 6 rather than 8. So that's the theory right now. Like I said, it sounds accurate, but I feel like ArenaNet likes to have a bigger time frame. Another thing in the news that we had is that the ArenaNet company as a whole has also grown to 400 employees working at the studio. Now, whether this means all 400 are working on Guild Wars 2, whether this means all 400 are working on the new expansion, or whether this means that they're maybe potentially working on another project, a side project, maybe some type of mobile game, who knows what they're creating, but the number of employees at ArenaNet has increased. So this could mean good things. Whether it be for Guild Wars 2, we don't know. That's another reason why maybe the next expansion will be coming sooner than we think. I certainly did not expect this expansion to come this year fall, and maybe it won't, but some people are saying that that's their guess. And if that's the case, heck, it'd be perfect for them to announce it at PAX Prime in the summer. So maybe that will happen. That would be pretty cool, and that would be pretty crazy. However, while we're on the topic of the next expansion, I do want to talk a little bit about what the next expansion would then have to improve on. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Wooden Potatoes' channel, it's a great Guild Wars 2 YouTuber. I'm a fan of his, and he really produces good content. It's a bit different content from what you see on my channel here. Here we focus a bit more on guides and summarizing patches and stuff like that. He focuses a bit more on lore and focuses a bit more on speculation and things like that. But recently he's released a whole series of Heart of Thorns review videos. A few of these videos are like hour-long videos. Some of them range from like 30 to 45 minutes. So maybe some of you won't have the time to watch all those videos because it is a lot to watch. However, I have watched so far every video, and I sort of want to talk a little bit about some of the things that he touches on and some of the feelings that I share with him, as well as some of the things that I think Heart of Thorns could have improved on, and maybe this could sort of open up a great discussion in the comments section for you guys to, tell me and have a nice discussion amongst yourself of what you want to see in this next expansion and what you think needs to have improved for this next expansion to be a better success than Heart of Thorns. Because if we're completely honest here, Heart of Thorns was disappointing. On initial release, I mean, yes, now after everything's released, now that raids are in, now that legendary weapons are in, now that we have a bunch of new maps, yes, Heart of Thorns is worth the money. It's worth the price tag, and it's a pretty good expansion, a really good expansion. Now that we're including all of Living World Season 3 and everything else, right? So if you want to include that in the price tag, then yes, it's a great expansion. However, on initial release, Heart of Thorns was pretty disappointing. And if they don't want to make that same mistake this time with this new expansion that could possibly be coming out in the fall, then they're definitely going to need to look at some of these things. And hopefully they have looked at them and revamped some of these things and have made changes for the better. And one of the biggest things that really sticks out to me and still bothers me to this day, and I think was one of the biggest downfalls of the expansion, that was that there were only 4 maps. There wasn't a lot of explorable content for players. And this really hit me hard because I'm a player that loves to explore. I love going to new maps. I like walking around, exploring new areas, finding new points of interest, doing different hearts, new waypoints, new vistas. I like all that stuff. In fact, I love exploring the open world. Map completion to me is pretty fun. So I mean, I know some people don't like map completion. They think it's really boring. But to me, I kind of like map completion. It's kind of fun to, explore different areas in the world and, explore every nook and cranny. So that I felt like was missing in Heart of Thorns. With only 4 maps and 3 maps really to only explore, because Dragon's Stand, you could never really explore. It was a lot of different areas were blocked, they were gated by an event, and you never really had time to explore that map. And I'm pretty sure that I don't even have that map complete yet. That map is not completed for me yet because I'm still missing like a few vistas. I'm still missing a few vistas. I'm still missing a few point of interest. So really, we only had 3 maps to explore. Now, they were fairly big maps. I'll give them that. They were big maps. But the fact that there were only 3 maps in this expansion was a huge downfall. And it definitely hit a lot of people hard, including me. So I think for the new expansion, they're going to have to put a lot more maps in. The story was also really short, too. I felt like a lot of people completed it within like a week. Even though it took me a bit longer to complete the story, I still felt like the personal story was a lot longer. I mean, if you think about it, Guild Wars 2, the original game, took 2 years to make, and the expansion took 2 years to make, but the personal story feels so much longer. At least in my perspective, when I did my personal story, it felt a lot longer than the Heart of Thorns one did. And so that's another big problem that I saw. The story was really short, and this definitely also needs to be improved on our next expansion. It needs to be a bit longer. There needs to be more maps. There needs to be more content. Heart of Thorns was an expansion that delivered a lot of features. It delivered a lot of new systems. It delivered a lot of foundation for the game, which is great, but I felt like, isn't that something that should have been created and should have been taken care of in the original base game? I feel like Heart of Thorns lacked the content because there was so much focus on the foundation, on the systems, on a new class, on specializations, on masteries, on creating all these new systems, that there wasn't a lot of focus on content. And when you think about expansions, if you think about any EverQuest 2 expansion, if you think about any World of Warcraft expansion, whatever game, put expansion after it, what is the main feature in that expansion? Content, maps, the borders of the continent changing drastically. For Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns, the borders didn't really change that much, and they really only changed, maybe a year and a half later when all the Living World Season 3 maps were put in. So initial launch, Heart of Thorns just was lacking a lot of content. Now don't get me wrong, Living World Season 3 is the best Living World season that we have yet to have in this game. It provided some of the best detailed stories. It provided some of the best dialogue, some of the best gameplay. It really made you excited for the next episode and for the next episode. They ended well, they started well. The content in these episodes was also really well done. Now obviously it had its flaws, but these living world episodes that we had in season 3 were pristine. But part of me just can't get over the fact that if they would have included all those new maps in Living World Season 3, they could have just included that into the base expansion. I felt like the launch of Heart of Thorns would have been so much better. And it's not only that. I mean, that can be argued. You could say, okay, yeah, well, GS, the new maps weren't ready because the story wasn't ready. So, you can't expect them to put the maps in when there's no story to go with it. That would be kind of stupid. And yeah, I can agree with you. So, the fact that all these new maps they could have put in earlier, yeah, is arguable. But we're forgetting about raids. Raids was advertised for the expansion to be in the expansion when you get the expansion, right? I mean, if you get an expansion, you're expecting the content to be there. Well, not all the raids were there. Not all the legendary weapons were there. And the content that we did have in the Heart of Thorns maps, a lot of changes needed to go into that because a lot of the content was flawed. A lot of things were time-gated. A lot of the adventures weren't as easily accessible as they are currently today. Heck, even the fractal changes that they put into the game for Heart of Thorns, even the entire mastery track for fractals that was made for fractals. There's an entire mastery track made for fractals, but was completely useless because fractals were at such a terrible state when Heart of Thorns came out. Fractals were never as popular as they were today. They were never as popular as they are today, especially not on a release of Heart of Thorns, because they just weren't rewarding. They just weren't fun to play. Thinking about it, fractals really only gained popularity when they released that one patch where they changed the rewards, where they rebalanced it, where they started revamping the fractals, making them better, putting improvements into them. All of that should have been done in the expansion for Heart of Thorns. Those fixes and those balances and those reward changes that shouldn't have been put into the game, half a year or a year after Heart of Thorns was released, that should have been part of the game, part of that expansion. So it still feels like that Heart of Thorns wasn't that great of an expansion because a lot of the great things it has now that a lot of us got for free, it could have had on initial release, and they could have added new content that didn't have to relate to Heart of Thorns now, when now they're fixing things. So those are just some general things that I think this new expansion that's coming out needs to address. Things need to be paid more attention to on initial release. More maps, a longer story, and just more attention to detail in general, to avoid these long content droughts that we had after the expansion's release, and to avoid some of these delays that we had concerning the Heart of Thorns maps and raids and legendary weapons and so on and so forth. Now, as for masteries, once again, this was a great little idea for Heart of Thorns, but I feel like the new expansion has to make better masteries. They have to improve this mastery system and put more interesting masteries into the game. Now, there are a lot of cool and a lot of interesting and a lot of awesome masteries already in the game. Gliding did a great job. Each new level that you earned in masteries for gliding gave you something new and gave you something noticeably new that you could interact with and that you could see. The gliding track was phenomenally done. The jumping mushrooms were phenomenally done. The adrenaline mushrooms were phenomenally done. A lot of these things are still usable today. People still use jumping mushrooms. People still use gliding. People still use adrenaline mushrooms. People still use several of these masteries because they are still relevant today. But a lot of other masteries are not even relevant anymore because they just don't have a use in the game as much. One of the biggest disappointments in masteries even were the language masteries. Each track basically had a language mastery where you would learn to understand the races in each map, but in reality, all it does for you is just open a vendor. You're not really, going through a journey to understand them, and they give you all these new perks, and you open new quests or you open new achievements or things like that. There's some of that, but the real reason why you do these language masteries is just to open the vendor. And that's also very underwhelming. And if you take a look at the core Tyria masteries, a lot of those are also just, unlocked and forgotten. These masteries that we got were supposed to be, grand things that we would all remember and use every single time we play, such as gliding. I mean, we use gliding pretty much every single time we play. We use jumping mushrooms almost every single time we play too, if you happen to go in the areas where they're used a lot. Heck, even some of the new masteries that we got, such as the ancient magic masteries, a few of those we tend to use often as well, especially now since some new bosses take advantage of that mechanic. At least they're being used throughout the game, such as in current events and whatnot. So, I like that some of these masteries are made relevant throughout the game, but it's easy to spot a lot of other masteries are not made relevant. They're not useful in all parts of the game. They may be very useful in a story step only. They may be only very useful in a specific area in the game. And that's just something that doesn't feel fun. Not only that, but the other thing masteries were supposed to do is allow you to progress through them and unlock all of them. It makes it feel like you're on a journey, and all that's pretty much thrown out the window too, because once you acquire all your masteries on one character, you have them for all your characters. And I know there can be some debate on that. Some people don't want to grind for the masteries over and over again, and I can see that, but I feel like maybe they could have made the acquisition of masteries a bit easier a second time or a third time through. At least you're still able to build your character up with masteries. And the whole point of masteries was supposed to be that there won't be a new level cap, but there will be sort of like a secondary level cap of masteries. Well, now it's pretty much the exact same thing as it was before Heart of Thorns came out. Before Heart of Thorns, everyone just had a level 80 number next to their name. Well, now if you played the game long enough, everyone pretty much has just a max masteries number next to them. And if you don't do raids, you probably have minus a certain amount as that being your max mastery. So there's no real sense of progression through these masteries anymore after you do them the first time, and that could have been pretty cool for each new character that you make. So masteries need to be improved in this second expansion. They need to include new masteries that are made relevant throughout the entire game and are not just relevant for a small niche or a small area in the game or a specific map only. Time and time again, and I'll mention this again, I've mentioned this in previous videos, if they could add masteries that allow you to do new things, such as skinning animals, such as learning how to harvest leather racks throughout the world, such as fishing maybe, anything like that. These are just 3 examples that I have. Or learning how to break through protection or retaliation against enemies. Maybe that'd be a bit too overpowered, but small little masteries like that can actually be made relevant throughout the entire game and not just a small area of the game. I feel like that's what we need a lot more of, and less of these masteries that are just forgotten over time and you completely forget about them, and the only ever real lore you get from them or real relevance you get from them is from the UI, and when you actually start unlocking them, you read the little description that you have there, but after that, it's just something you forget about and it has no relevance anymore. You accept it as just any other vendor, such as the language ones. You accept that language mastery as not a special type of vendor, but like any other vendor really. So masteries need to be improved, and the same could be said about elite specializations. Now, elite specializations definitely were at a better place than masteries were. I feel like elite specializations, they had a bit more work put into them, and this is true. I think elite specializations were one of the best things Heart of Thorns had in them, because it gave every class new skills, gave every class new traits, it gave every class a whole new trait line. It was great. And every class has some pretty cool new interesting mechanic skills and a new weapon even. The only problem is that a lot of these new specializations were all just kind of overpowered from the original class. A lot of people, people who play Elementalist, you'll see no Elementalist stay as a regular Elementalist. They're all going to be a Tempest. And why? And one, because there's no real specialization of that class, and I'll get a bit more into that in just a second. But second, because it's just so much more powerful than the regular Elementalist. Tempest is so much more powerful just. So there's no reason for anyone to stay as an Elementalist. And the same could be said about a lot of the other ones as well, such as Mesmer and Chronomancer. A lot of people are going to want to be Chronomancer over a Mesmer. A lot of people are going to want to be a Berserker over just a regular warrior. You know, a lot of these different classes, their specializations are a lot more powerful than the regular classes. And if the next expansion has even more powerful specializations than Heart of Thorns specializations, well then the whole Elite specialization system is kind of just a fail, because this system is supposed to allow you to make a choice. Do you want to stay your original class, or do you want to use a specialization, or, you know, to specialize in something and do something better than any other class can? And if they're just going to make more powerful versions of the current Elite specializations, then that part of the game just isn't existent anymore, and it would really suck. And another thing, like I was saying, Ray, there's no real specialization in these Elite specializations. And what I mean by that is that, and this is one of the biggest things I don't like about these Elite specializations, is that, you know, for example, like I said, the Tempest. Tempest was made to support people. It was made as a support style class, where you could use your auras, where you could use your Warhorn, where you could use your Rune of the Tempest to, you know, give auras that last for a long time, that make a big difference to your entire party. That was a really cool idea for a playstyle. But instead, that's not what Tempest is used these days anymore for. It's not used as support. It's not used as an elementalist to cast a bunch of auras and, you know, as a defensive support role. I mean, yes, some people play it as that, and I do have a build, you know, supporting that. But a lot of people use Tempest, including myself, as a way to boost your damage even more. There are traits in the Tempest track that boost your damage. The overloads just boost your damage. They're very powerful, and you end up doing more DPS on a Tempest than you do as a regular Elementalist. So, as you can see, Tempests aren't really specializing in support. They're kind of just boosting the playstyle of the Elementalist that was already there. The same can be said about the Reaper. The Reaper was supposed to be this Elite specialization that gave Necromancers a power playstyle where you could build power and do lots of base damage instead of condition damage. But the same thing, just like Tempests, people aren't really using the Reaper as a power build Necromancer. They're using it as condition damage, which is what Necromancer was already used for. Like I said, there's no real specializing in these classes, in these Elite specializations, where in a specific task or a specific role in these Elite specializations, it just feels like an advancement of the original class, and they just do too many things too well. They need to focus in on something more specific for these specializations, and I'm hoping that for this next expansion, they do that. They don't just make a more powerful version of the one we have already, and they don't just make another subclass that's fairly good at doing everything, and it really isn't a specialization, which is what it's supposed to be. I also feel like gaining your specialization wasn't that great either. I mean, there was no real story behind it. There was no real lore behind it. There was no real quest behind it. All you did was fill up a bar. And that was kind of it. It was kind of lackluster as well. So Elite specializations need to be improved on in the next expansion too. And the next topic I want to move on to is guild halls. Now, guild halls were supposed to be this great thing in Heart of Thorns, and they were for, you know, kind of a partial amount of time. People were really excited about guild halls, and I thought they were really great, and I think they still are really great. I just feel like there's a lot of missed potential. In this next expansion, they have to focus on bringing more reason for people to go to guild halls. Because nowadays, nobody really goes to the guild hall anymore unless you're going there for those synthesizers, to harvest the synthesizers, or if you're going there to get your daily boosts or potions for gathering, or for World vs. World, or for PvP, or for experience, getting extra magic, find, you know, those potions that the tavern gives. I feel like there wasn't enough focus on things surrounding guild halls. There was a lot of focus on the guild hall, like decorating and having all these structures and leveling it up. You know, there was a lot of focus on guild halls, but there was not a lot of focus on everything surrounding guild halls, like guild missions. There were no new guild missions. You know, guild missions still aren't something that's very popular. Not a lot of people I still don't see a lot of people doing guild missions. There could be more people doing guild missions. They could have added more guild missions, you know? I still don't see many people going to the guild hall for the social aspect of it. The tavern, for example, I always thought when I built my tavern in the guild hall, it would be this cool area where a lot of people would go to hang out and just socialize, but that's not the case at all. Nobody goes to the tavern unless they're going there to get their potions. It would be cool if they could have like mini games in the tavern, or if they could have ways to test out some gem store items, or have boxes of fun there, or anything. You know, there's a lot of things in the game they could put there that could attract people there, and people could just hang out and socialize. That would be really cool. And like I said, there's not enough focus on things surrounding the guild hall. There's a lot of focus on the guild hall and the structure of it and how it's made and everything, but there needs to be more focus on reasons why you should go to your guild hall. There needs to be more of a purpose for your guild hall. I feel like that was missing and kind of missed in Heart of Thorns, and this needs to be a focus for the next expansion, and hopefully it is. And I guess the last two topics I want to talk about shortly is raiding and War vs. World and PvP. Now, raiding, I think, did a phenomenal job in Heart of Thorns. I can't criticize much in raiding. I think if they continue to do what they did in Heart of Thorns for the next expansion, raiding will continue to excel and continue to be as successful as it is today. It's challenging content, it gives you lore, it gives you answers to certain plot holes and story loose ends that we didn't have answers to, now we get answers. It gives you rewarding rewards, it gives you a fun time with your friends to, you know, go through a challenge that's actually fairly difficult, and it forces you to work together. I think raids are great. The only criticism that I have for raids is that there was too much focus on limiting team comps. For example, boons. Boons is probably one of the biggest problems. Certain skills, certain buffs, and certain boons are only applied to 5 people. Certain heals are even only applied to a certain number of people. So I feel like this needs to be streamlined to affect the entire raid party. And why is this so crucial and so important? Is because it limits team comps. A lot of team comps in raids, you'll see 2 PS warriors, or you'll see 2 revenants, or 2 of a certain class. And why? Only because the entire raid party can get affected by a boon, or a buff, or a heal, or so the entire party can benefit from something very specific a class does. I also feel like there needs to be more of a focus on build diversity in raids. There's really only 1 tank needed, there's really only 1 healer needed, and 8 other DPS classes. I feel like there needs to be a bit more acceptance to other classes. In certain raids, some classes are completely useless, and some raid teams don't even want a specific class for a specific raid wing. I feel like that's something that should not be part of the raiding environment. Every class should be viable and should be usable for each of the raids, and you shouldn't need to double up on a class just to gain that perk that class gives. One person with that one class should be able to give that perk to the entire party. You shouldn't need to double up just to get that. So I feel like that's the only criticism I have there, and maybe that can be improved on in the next expansion as well. And as for World vs. World and PvP, I don't have much to say here, mainly because I don't spend too much time in those areas. I do spend a lot of time in PvP, and I know this is a topic that has a lot of different opinions. Some people say PvP is terrible, some people say PvP is great. Personally, I think the changes made to PvP in Heart of Thorns were great. The introduction of leagues, the introduction of a ranking system, the introduction of these new rewards that we get, I think were all great. And it's definitely made PvP a lot more popular than it ever was. And a lot more people are playing it, and it makes it a bit more rewarding to play as well. Now, the only criticism I have is that there needs to be more balance. I feel like one of the main problems that we have currently in PvP is that there aren't enough balance patches. Having balance patches every 3 or 4 months isn't good enough. Balance the game a lot more frequently, because this is one of the biggest complaints that we have currently in PvP, is that there's not enough balance, and there needs to be more balance. There needs to be more attention to each class and how they interact with other classes, and every class needs to be viable and equally as good as other classes. I still feel like, to this day, even though I see ArenaNet trying to balance, I still feel like there are some classes that are much better than other classes. And as for War vs. World, well, that can be a whole other video even, because War vs. World is such a huge topic. there's such a huge timeline of that, and they added a whole new borderland. They added desert borderlands for Heart of Thorns, and everyone thought that would be great. But in short, I'll say this: the World vs. World Desert Borderlands was a great idea. However, it's just such a huge map. It's such a large map. It's too big that it throws some people off, and they end up not wanting to play in that Borderland map. And kind of that's why a lot of people didn't play World vs. World so much, because the map is so big, it's so much to learn, and it takes so long to travel from one place to the other. That's kind of just annoying a little bit. And with the amount of problems that we already have in World vs. World, whether it be with scoring, whether it be with matchmaking, whether it be with certain teams being outnumbered, whether it be with balancing the skills, whether it be with anything, you could pick anything in World vs. World, and there's bound to be at least a minor problem with it. There needs to be paid a lot more attention to it. And very similar, again, just like guild halls, there was a lot of focus put on building this new desert borderland. There was a lot of focus put on building these temples in it, or building these new mechanics in it, but there wasn't enough focus on the surrounding areas of World vs. World, such as the foundation, such as how World vs. World functions as a whole. Sure, the new Desert Borderlands map was great. It had a lot of new awesome mechanics. It played really cool if you ever got into it. But that doesn't make the problems that World vs. World has always had go away. It was a great idea to market the expansion, a whole new map for you to play, a whole new Borderland with all these cool things in it. I think it was a great marketing idea, and on paper it looked good, and heck, even on screen it looked good. But the more you play it and the more experienced you are in it, the more problems you see and the more flaws you see in it. So a lot more attention to detail and the surrounding areas of World vs. World needs to be paid to in the next expansion as well. So that's pretty much everything I want to talk about. Just to give you a quick summary of what I think needs to be improved on in the next expansion if it does come this fall. These are some things we want to look out for. These are some topics that we want to keep in mind when we're playing the next expansion to ensure that these things did get improved on, or if they didn't get improved on, that we should make these topics aware to the developers and say, hey, this has still not been fixed since Heart of Thorns even. Can we get a fix for it? And just sort of give you an idea of what went wrong in Heart of Thorns and what can't go wrong and shouldn't go wrong in the next expansion, because if the next expansion is as disappointing as Heart of Thorns was, then the future for Guild Wars 2 may not look so bright. Because I can excuse one expansion not being as great because their first expansion. But 2 expansions, even after players have given their feedback, even after people have spoken very strongly over what needs to be fixed and what was great and what was bad and what will be good to see in the game, after the amount of feedback we've given it and after the amount of love that this community has for this game and the help that we're willing to provide, the ideas we're willing to provide, if they can't deliver on that for the next expansion, then I think times will look a bit grim and some people may not like to play Guild Wars 2 anymore. Not to mention the fact that people won't even buy the expansion, because I know a lot of people didn't buy Heart of Thorns because they didn't like it at the very beginning. I think a lot more people bought it as Living World Season 3 progressed and they saw the new maps they're getting. So I think people bought it then. So hopefully what they're releasing later this year, if they release it later this year, if the theories are correct, hopefully they improve on these topics that we talked about today. And feel free to leave a comment down below with what you think needs to be improved on, with what you want to see in the game. What new specializations do you want to see in the game? What new areas of the map do you want to see in the game? Will Crystal Desert be the next place for our expansion? Let me know in the comment section what you think Heart of Thorns needs to improve on for the next expansion. Let me know what you think about the most recent patch, as well as when you think this expansion will be released. Like I said, if it's getting released in the fall, we'll probably hear about it PAX Prime in the summer, and that's the case, that'll be really awesome. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you happen to watch the entire thing, thank you, really appreciate it. Sorry I didn't make some of the other videos that I had planned. I wanted to make a video on Ascended Gear versus Exotic Gear. I wanted to make a new Traveler's Tale. I wanted to make a few other videos, but I feel like they all take a bit more time, and I am in my final exams week right now, so doing a talking video like this one is a bit easier and a bit less time consuming. So hopefully you enjoyed the video nonetheless. And if you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We have plenty of other Guild Wars 2 content on the channel. And if you're interested in checking out my most recent video on the channel, go and click the annotation right here. If you're interested in a similar video to this one that you might be interested in, click the annotation here. If you want to subscribe to the channel or to any of my other channels, such as the tutorials channel or the vlogging channel, click the annotation here. And if you want to donate $1 to my Patreon page, you can click the annotation here. That's pretty much it, guys. Thank you for watching as always, and this is GSmaniamsmart, and I'll be back sooner than you think. Don't go anywhere.